Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's about 7:30 on Friday morning. I've been reading through your responses on the forum, and I have three things I want to point out to you that will, I think, help you get focused. But first off, I have to show you this portrait. See the old boy up there looking down at me from the mantelpiece? That's my grandfather, my mother's dad, who was a teacher and a superintendent of schools and a banker in southern Kentucky, and he started his teaching career just about 100 years ago. I found his one of his original teaching certificates, and it's now 100 years old. So when I sit in this room and teach, I'm sitting with my generations of teachers looking over my shoulder, and it's a kind of a cool heritage. Anyway, there he is. So this morning I want to address the questions in the forum. First off, the first one asks you to identify a thesis statement. The reason I'm asking you for that is you're going to have to write a thesis statement pretty quickly. On the first essay, the summary essay, I'm going to give you basically the thesis, and you won't have to worry about it then. But it's important to start looking at the assertions people make and how they support those assertions, and what kind of evidence they marshal. This will be an incredibly useful skill as the presidential elections are coming up. And you want to examine these people and their evidence and how they present their evidence. So there's a couple of thesis statements that you all picked. One was, by couching group-based profiling as necessary to Homeland Security, the government has traded the principles of universal equality and individual dignity for the presumption of safety. That's near the bottom of the first page. So some of you picked on that one as the thesis. Others of you picked the one at the top of the next page. It is important to realize that racial profiling has not gotten any less wrong. The government is just more willing to do the wrong thing, and to be willing to do the wrong thing is a devastating rejection of the values of American life. Well, excuse me, either of those is a pretty reasonable thesis statement for this article. The second one I read is in this default position. Normally one looks for the thesis at the end of the introductory material. So when you start writing your thesis statements, you'll be putting them at the end of your introduction. So that second one is in the right place, and the other one is also a reasonable position. So the way you determine is you ask yourself, what is the article actually about? If I want to know what you are interested in, it's going to be mostly what you talk a lot about. So it's not rocket science here to figure out that what the article is mostly interested in is what it mostly talks about and what it mostly supports. So let's look at those two. The first one, by couching group-based profiling as necessary, that one, the government has traded the principles of universal equality for the presumption of safety. So that thesis statement says to you quite clearly the article is going to be about these trade-offs that the government has made, that this author is asserting the government has made. So is the entire article about these trade-offs, or is 90% of the article about these trade-offs? Is it specifically related to that statement? Is it evidence and other kinds of material directly related to the trade-offs that this article is asserting the government has made? Well, if it is, then that's the thesis statement. If that's what the article supports, that's the thesis statement. It's not rocket science, again, as I said. The other one, the government is just more willing to do the wrong thing. Okay, so if you look at the article, is it a moral argument? Is it talking about how the wrong things the government has done and how the government is increasingly willing to do wrong things, however the author defines wrong things? Okay, so the way you determine a thesis statement is you look and you say, ask yourself the question, what is this article actually about? And what the article is actually about is what the article mostly talks about. And then you go back and you say, well, this thesis statement is not supported in the article, so therefore it can't be the thesis statement. This one is, so therefore it can be the thesis statement. That's how you determine what a thesis statement is. That's how I will evaluate your thesis statements when you start writing your essays. I will look at your thesis statement, which will be at the bottom of your introduction, and then I'll say, okay, does this paper, this essay, actually support that thesis? Is there integrity between the thesis and the paper, or does it fly apart and self-destruct? So that's how I'll judge that. Most of you did fine, and there's cases for either of those positions, those thesis statements. There are cases for a couple of the other ones that you all chose. But the point is not to say, I think it's about this. I think you have to say, I think it's about this because the evidence supports that. Taking the next step and looking at the evidence and then saying, well, my original hypothesis doesn't work, so I need another hypothesis. We'll talk about that when we get to logical fallacies and things like that. All right, so good job on that one. The second thing I want to talk about is leading into what I just said, the nature of the evidence. As I'm reading over most of your forum responses, I'm noticing you're not really citing evidence. Now that's not a huge deal. The forums are relatively informal discussions, but they are practice for the essays that you're going to be writing and the way you're going to marshal your own evidence. So a lot of them say, well, I think this article is about, or I think the audience for this article is blah, blah, blah. And then you go right on and you think it because that's what you think. So a rational thinker and a trained thinker and a student needs to say, I think this because. You need to give a reason why you think what you think. Just thinking, I think it because I think it, that doesn't wash. That's what politicians do, and increasingly we're not buying that crap anymore. So I want to point you to our colleague Marina, whose response kind of stood out to me in talking about the audience for this piece. And you might go back and take a look at her response. She says she thinks the audience is directed towards the general public, but then she immediately goes on to say, I think it's directed toward the general public because it doesn't use fancy legal terms. It's sort of written in regular English for regular people. So therefore, the conclusion is it's directed toward the average person. You see how that works? That's how it works. I think this because I see that in the article. I think this because I see this evidence. Not I think this because I think this, or because my mommy told me to. I think this because the evidence is in the article. That'll become increasingly important as we work along, that you look for evidence in other writers, and if you don't find the evidence, the writer is less credible. And of course, the ultimate result is for you to learn to provide evidence for your own beliefs, because that makes you credible, that makes you worth listening to. So thinking back to Marina's response, I think it's directed toward a general audience because there's no fancy language in there and it's sort of written in common English. That's a reasonable position based on evidence. I happen to agree with Marina, but even if I didn't agree with her, I would still have to say, yeah, your position makes sense. Again, don't do what the politicians do. Do what you're learning to do here. So even if I disagreed with her, I would still have to say, yeah, I disagree with you, but I see why your position makes sense. That's hard to do in this culture. One of the reasons this class is, I call it countercultural, is because we're learning to do something that our culture doesn't really want us to do. Everything mitigates against careful thinking and good analysis of social phenomena. They don't want us to do this, and so they don't reward it in most ways. So that's the second thing. When you're responding to these questions, and again, these are informal discussions. I'm not expecting formalized philosophical essays, but it's a good instinct to say when you write, I think this, immediately go on and say, I think this because of this evidence that I can point to over here. You can make that step. You'll be taking a step that I'm very much afraid most of the American population is losing the ability to do, and that's why the politicians are controlling us, because we're not paying attention. We need to stop that. Anyway, that's enough preaching for that. The third thing I want to talk about, again, I understand that these forum discussions are informal discussions, and you're welcome to say anything you want, providing it's respectful and courteous and so forth. And you're welcome to debate issues. But remember, the prompts ask you to analyze the piece. So several of you, you started off on the audience one, and you say, well, I think the audience is this, bam, and then you're off talking about your opinion on the issue. Okay, this exercise is not asking you for your opinion on the issue. You're welcome to give your opinion on the issue, but if you're giving your opinion on the issue instead of answering the question, that's going to be a huge problem down the line for some of you folks. All right, so we'll come back and back and back to this. You're going to hear me say argument, not issue, argument, not issue, argument, not issue, over and over and over again. But if your forum post dismisses the question and uses the question as an excuse to talk about your opinion on the issue of racial profiling, that's not what the prompt is asking you to do. And the prompt is asking you to do what it's asking you to do because it's asking you to look at the evidence. Say, I believe this because I see this over here. That's absolutely essential. So again, it's not a huge deal in the forum posts, but do try to answer the questions before you start talking about your opinion on the issue. They're designed this way for a reason, and the reason is to help make this easier for you. Not so much to provide a forum to discuss your opinion on issue A, B, or C, but to provide a forum where you discuss the evidence you see for someone else's position. Okay, so answer the questions first. Answer all the questions first. Give evidence and reasons for your answers. And then if you want to talk about your opinion on racial profiling, that's perfectly fine. But don't do that instead of doing what you're being asked to do. And again, not because it's wrong to do that, but because that's not what you're being asked to do, and you won't gain the skill that we're trying to teach here if you don't sort of follow the procedures. So some of you did just fine. Some of you answered one question and then wandered off into talking about your opinions. Some of you answered all the questions and then talked about your opinion, which is perfectly fine. Some of you didn't answer any of the questions at all and took the prompt as an opportunity to discuss your opinion on racial profiling, which is not, well, it won't work for you down the road to approach it in that way. Okay, so it's not a big deal. I just wanted to mention it to you this morning and have you maybe go back and take a look at your forum responses, some of you this week, and be sure you do what you're being asked to do, because you're being asked to do a certain thing because that's teaching a certain skill. And if you don't do the thing you're being asked to do, you're probably not going to get the skill. It's that simple. It's not about me controlling the discussion or anything like that, or you not being allowed to express your opinion. It's none of that. It's saying, I need to teach you this right here, and I'm asking you to do that so I can teach you this. And if you don't do that, I can't teach you this. It's that simple. So be careful about that. I hope you're all having a great weekend, and I will talk to you very soon. I'm going to get this up for you this morning so you can take a look at it. Bye, and we'll chat soon. Thanks. Bye.